SRAM versus Shimano. This one is always a hot topic. I've ridden both group sets over the last year between the Athos, the Melee, the Crux, and the Epic, and I've figured out a few pain points on each group set. A friend over the weekend asked me if I were to buy a brand new bike today, would I build it with Shimano or would I build it with SRAM? And if you had asked me that question 6 months ago, without a doubt, I would have said SRAM. But 6 months later, I'm starting to second guess that decision. The SRAM versus Shimano debate is like the Ford versus Chevy debate here in the States. Both are great, but they're different. And if you favor one, chances are you have a very strong opinion about it. It's my opinion that choosing one of these groups over the other isn't necessarily gonna help you win a race, unless of course your shifter battery dies or you drop a chain. What I do believe though is that each of these brands have strengths and weaknesses that play into different disciplines within our sport. If I were building a road bike today, I might go Shimano or maybe SRAM. And if I were building a mountain bike today, I would definitely go SRAM. And if I were building a gravel bike, well, there's a little bit of a toss-up there. Let's talk about why. If you want to do a deep dive into the tech specs on these videos, I'd recommend visiting the brand websites or taking a look at the handful of videos that have already been done on these groups. My goal here is to share my perspective as someone who's ridden thousands of miles on these two groups over the last year. Now, I share my perspective as someone who's a pretty normal dude. I ride around 7,500 miles a year. I enter the occasional race, hold down a normal 9-to-5 job, and I don't get paid to ride a bike. And none of these videos are sponsored. Not SRAM nor Shimano has reached out to me and asked me to do a video. They have no say in what I am about to talk about. And for you Campy fans who are watching, I'd love to hear your comments below about why you think Campy is better than both of these groups. We'll start with road because that's where I've spent the majority of my time this year. On the Athos and the Melee, I had SRAM Red eTap AXS with a 50-37 chainring and a 10-33 cassette. And on the tarmac, I've had Shimano Dura Ace Di2 with a 53-39 chainring and a 10-30 cassette. As I went back and forth between the tarmac and the Athos and the Melee, I did notice that Shimano was significantly quicker on the shifting, it was smoother, and I found that I really liked the shape of the hoods. And it just works. I mean, I've got 10,500 miles on the tarmac, and the group set works as well today as it did at mile 1, and I've not had a battery die one time this year. Again, I wish I could say that same thing about SRAM. A few people have asked, why did you race the tarmac over the Melee this year at Ultegra? I mean, I had both bikes. In theory, the Melee would have been the better choice. It was a nearly brand new bike at the time, and the tarmac had almost 10,000 miles on it. Well, a lot of it boiled down to familiarity with the bike, but it also boiled down to reliability. There are just a few variables with that SRAM group set I didn't want to chance the one race a year on, and there are some things that just left me a little bit nervous. If I'm building a new road bike today, I'm building it with Shimano. And if I'm looking for a value play within that space, I'm building it with the new Ultegra, which I think looks great. I mean, look, between Dura Ace and Ultegra, you're saving over $2,000, and I think the difference in weight between those groups is like 200 grams. With that $2,000, I'm gonna buy a Wahoo kicker, and I'm gonna subscribe to my favorite Trainer Road, Zwift, Sufferfast, whatever it might be, and I'm gonna be that much faster. In fact, much faster than I would have been had I spent the extra $2,000 on the Dura Ace group. If I'm building up a new mountain bike today, well, it's pretty easy. I'm building it with SRAM. See, I really like the wireless capabilities, especially as they pertain to mountain bikes. I like the ruggedness and the toughness of that group. And I like the way that having wireless components cleans up a lot of that rat's nest of wires and cables that you get. The only area I'd probably make an exception there is with the brakes. I think everyone would argue that the Shimano brakes are superior to the SRAM brakes. But other than that, I'd go full SRAM. And if I were looking for a value play, I would just get the X01 group instead of the XX1 group. I think you save a ton of money there. And again, just like Dura Ace versus Ultegra, you have a minimal weight penalty, but you save thousands of dollars. If I'm building up a gravel bike, well, here's where things get interesting. If I'm running a one bike setup, I still think that SRAM is the way to go. And if I'm looking for that perfect in-between spot, I think the Explorer group is fantastic with that 1044 cassette, maybe with a 46 or possibly a 48 tooth chainring. If you're running a double chainring or a 2x, well, I'm really liking the 4835 with the 1036 cassette. I think that's a really great setup, but I wouldn't at all rule out Shimano. See, when I had that Aspera with the GRX, I really liked the shape of the hoods, and I loved how crisp and smooth the shifting was. Yes, you lose some of those wireless capabilities, but maybe you gain a little bit as well. So if I had to choose something for gravel, I would say that I lean SRAM, but I wouldn't rule out Shimano by any means. One big thing to consider is the age of the group sets, and I'm not talking about buying used and how many miles are on it. I'm talking about just how long the groups have been out. If you look at SRAM's lineup, in a lot of ways, they're due for an update. And so it would be a real bummer to buy a $4,000 or more red group only to have them come out with a brand new group next summer. Whereas if you look at Shimano, they've just revamped just about every single component group in their lineup. In many ways, I think purchasing these newer upgraded groups helps your bike hold its value a little bit better. And look, if you're someone who's just getting into the sport and you're thinking you may want to upgrade in a year, it may be a worthwhile consideration. Or if you're someone who's trying out a gravel bike for the first time and you're thinking you may go back to mountain bikes or vice versa, it could be worthwhile to buy, again, an updated group. I also think it's worth mentioning that you shouldn't be afraid to mix and match components, especially if you're going for a certain look. If you look at my Crux, I have a full force build with a red crankset. And for everybody who looks at that bike, well, you may just think that it's a full red build. Not that I was necessarily going for that, I just prefer the look of the red crankset. If I were buying Shimano, I may get Ultegra everything and get the Dura Ace crankset because I think that it looks a little bit better. Just take cassettes for example. The price difference between a red and a force cassette is hundreds of dollars, in the same way that the price difference between an Ultegra and a Dura Ace cassette is hundreds of dollars. Would any of us realistically be able to tell the difference? Probably not. I'd love to hear your thoughts on each of these groups, whether you agree or disagree. I mean, it's open for debate. In the next videos, we're gonna talk about the Sprinter 4x4 that I've had now for 2 years. I'm gonna talk about some things that I wish I had known before I purchased it, some things that I wish I had known before I started the build out. We're gonna talk about some off-season stuff. We're gonna talk about some different training plans and where I think there's value in training with a smart trainer over the winter. And if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Really appreciate you. Till next time.